Welcome to my channel, The Orchid Hut. My name is Dana, and thank you for taking some of your time today to enjoy one of my orchid videos. This one is going to be transferring a Twinkle Oncidium orchid to a mount. Now, this little orchid was purchased several months ago. It wintered under the grow lights, and now, as you can see, it is getting two new growths right here, and those will not too far into the distant future. These will be getting roots, and I would like for this orchid to reestablish itself on this little cork bark mount. Now, before we get started, let me talk a little bit about the tips of these leaves, because this doesn't look great. There's a couple of things that could have happened, and I'm not sure which one it actually is, but salts can sometimes build up in the pot and cause this leaf tip burn. It's possible that it did not like the strength of fertilizer that I used at some point along the way, and that caused the leaf tip burn. And then sometimes this can be light that's too bright, but I can't really imagine that that was the case. I think that's the least likely cause, because this one was under grow lights, but it was really far, far away from the grow lights, like probably 14, 15, 16 inches. So I really don't think this was a light issue. I think it was either salt buildup in the pot, or it was maybe just fertilizer that was a little too intense. These orchids do not need to be fertilized heavily. So my cutters have already been flamed, and before I transfer this, I'm just going to go ahead and remove this damaged part. And it's unfortunate because, you know, you need the orchid to be able to do photosynthesis with the green part of the leaves. But this will tidy it up just a little bit and, you know, make it a little bit more attractive. Okay, so let's have a look at the official name. Oncidium Twinkle's Fragrance Fantasy. When this one bloomed, it was kind of an ivory color bloom with a yellow center. And if I can find a picture of it, I will put it up. And this cork bark is actually being reused. It was the top half of the dendrobium that I took off the mount the other day. So I am reusing this. I drilled a hole at the top. I did one of my wire hangers shaped like a coat hanger or a clothes hanger, because I find these easier to hang, whether it's on the rod that's underneath the shelf on the orchid hut, or whether it's hooking into the ledge or the side of a shelf that I have indoors. I find this shape a lot easier to work with, and I'll put a link in the upper right hand corner of the video to show you how I make these, because I demonstrated it on another video where I was preparing the cork bark mount. Okay, so next up, just in the way of supplies, I do have some damp sphagnum moss here to work with. I have my stretchy cord for tying the orchid to the cork bark mount, and then I have some hydrogen peroxide, because there is just the tiniest bit of white mold on the top of this pot, and so I do want to go ahead and spray this when I get it out of the pot. Alright, so let's see what's going on here. Ooh, pretty good root system. So it's going to be a matter of picking out this old sphagnum moss. Without damaging the roots. And at some point it will probably just require a rinse under the sink to get the remainder out. You know, this is the time of year, sort of full-on spring right now, where orchid growers, especially depending on how many you have in your collection, it's just a frenzy to get things, you know, repotted that you want to have repotted, things mounted that you want to have mounted, because this is the time of year when most orchids will respond well to that. And let me show you something here which is not ideal. So I pulled away the moss that was on this side of the plant, and this was the seedling pseudobulb, and it was actually buried in the moss. That's not great. That's a way for rot to start and spread to the rest of the plant. Now the plant doesn't need this any longer, so I'm just going to pull that off. I will be considering whether or not to remove this bulb. It also had moss all the way, you know, halfway up the bulb, so that was not ideal either. It was always a bit of a guessing game how to water this. I imagined that it was in sphagnum moss, as it is, but you know, sometimes you find something a little bit different once you take it out of the pot. This one turned out to be all sphagnum moss, just as it appeared on the top of the pot. But it was difficult to tell how wet it was staying. You know, the pot that it was in was a dark color. You couldn't really see in there. I was trying to use my finger to determine how sphagnum moss was drying out. And Oncidiums tend to prefer being a tiny bit more on the moist side. You want to re-water just as it's approaching getting dry. You know, they don't like to have wet feet. They don't want to stay soggy, but they do like that little bit of moisture. And you don't want to have it be dried out, because that will cause the pseudobulbs to immediately start to shrivel. And then sometimes once Oncidiums get dehydrated, it really is difficult to get those pseudobulbs to plump back up. Okay, so I think we may be to a point or to a place where going under the sink might do a better job of getting out that last little bit of sphagnum that's next to the plant. I don't think there's going to be much needed here in the way of a root trim, although I do need to make a decision about this next oldest pseudobulb. Okay, so looking good so far. I'm going to go ahead and rinse this out under the sink, and I'll be right back. Okay, so back from the sink. I have let this plant and the root system dry for just a little bit, and before I forget, I'm going to give just a very light and quick spray with 3% hydrogen peroxide. There was a tiny bit of white snow mold on top of the pot. Okay, and now what I want to do is closely inspect this plant before remounting it. And one of the things I see is there's this yellow sheath right here, and that can be pulled away and removed. It will help this new growth not have its new roots trapped. Okay, and now on this oldest side of the plant, you can see that the root system is less vigorous. The side of the plant that was in active growth has the newer root system. So this is the side where the root system is slowly dying away. And we need to make a decision about whether to keep this pseudobulb. And you know, it's not dehydrated. It does still have one green leaf. So I think for now, I will go ahead and leave it. However, the next time I were to remount this orchid, it probably would be the bulb that would be removed. And right here, there were some roots sticking out of the pot that sort of became air roots by default. I'm going to go ahead and trim those just a little bit. Not anything drastic. Okay. And I do believe that's about all we need to do. This is one of those finer root systems where it just does not pay to get too fussy with the trim. It's really not going to make a difference in the long run. If you see something, you know, an area, a clump where it is completely dead, of course, you know, you can remove that. But to try to trim every single root that has a thread on it is just not worth the time. So we're going to leave that like that. And then on the cork bark mount, we're going to put a layer of sphagnum, very, very light layer of sphagnum moss against the cork. And because this root system is a little bit on the large side, I want to make sure that that sphagnum covers a good bit of the cork bark. Okay. And it's much easier to work with this if it's damp. You can kind of shape it a bit better and it will stay in place until you're finished working with it. Okay, so now I'm going to be putting this root system on top of that damp sphagnum. Okay, and then on the top, I will just put another layer. And I do think that it's going to be much easier to judge now whether or not this orchid needs water, because I will be able to see the moss, I'll be able to tell how dry it is. Okay, so that's a good first layer. Now I may need to come back and add a little bit more. You'll notice right here that I'm not putting the moss up too high on that new growth, but I do want the roots to be able to find it when they start to sprout. Okay. I'm about out of cord. I will have to have a shopping trip. And the challenging part of this is just being able to really see what you're working with. Okay. Okay, so that I think is a good first wrap. Let me go ahead and cut this. And if you can, you know, you want to get a square knot here so that it doesn't pull through. Okay, that looks nice and tight. Okay, so maybe just another little piece down here. Okay, so I think that about does it. Let's go ahead and trim some of the tails from the stretchy cord. And I kind of like the asymmetrical look of this. I might add some Spanish moss. I may add some ball moss, but you know, it's a little bit asymmetrical, but that's okay. I think it looks great. Now, I have done a little bit of research on the care for this orchid. You know, obviously during the winter, it needed to be indoors under the grow lights. But even now, I think I will be keeping it inside under the grow lights because its upper temperature tolerance is about 90 degrees Fahrenheit. And in early May, mid-May, we are already having temperatures 95 plus degrees Fahrenheit, and it's not even to summer yet. So I do think my outdoor temperatures, even though this is considered an intermediate to slightly warm growing orchid, I think my temperatures are a bit too hot for it in the summer. So I'm going to be keeping it indoors. I think that will also allow me to keep it a bit better hydrated. And, you know, let's just see how it does. I will bring this one back from time to time in one of my orchid medley videos so that you can see how it's doing. And good luck with repotting and mounting your orchids this time of the year. If you enjoyed this video or learned something new, please give it a thumbs up, and the subscribe button will be coming up in the bottom right-hand corner of the screen. Thanks so much for watching, and talk to you next time.